everyone. I'm Judith Dietz, a software engineering director at BigCommerce. Today I'm chatting with Meg Desko, one of our lead software engineers in our San Francisco office. Meg's going to tell us a little bit about herself, her passions, and her role in STEM.
Thanks for having me, Judith.
Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you didn't go into software straight away.
I went for undergrad degrees at Drew University in northern New Jersey, and my undergraduate degrees are in chemistry and German. I then went on to graduate school, so I have a PhD in chemistry from Stanford. I graduated in 2008, 2009. The economy was quite bad. I ended up teaching at Cal State East Bay for a little bit. Then I taught at a women's university in Bangladesh. So I was one of the first faculty members at the Asian University for Women. My first tech exposure was my friend Dave had this company called Bump, the thing where you bump your phones together and they exchange contact information. And he was looking for basically a temp office manager while he was hiring his real one. So he said, I'll pay you $30 an hour. You come and you do office managery stuff. So I did that while I was continuing to look. And that gave me the idea that maybe there's something in tech with a science kind of crossover. I ended up finding that at this little tiny company called Question Systems. So they do clinical research data management. So they work with scientists and clinical researchers. And a lot of my job was building web forms that looked like pieces of paper, because apparently a lot of the MDs running these studies like their web forms to look like pieces of paper. So at first I was just building the forms. Then one day, I think I was there maybe a month or two, my boss said, oh, well, would you like to learn how to score some of these questionnaires? And I said, well, sure. So that is how I started learning how to code.
What are the passions in your life outside of writing code?
I love to read. I read about 100 books last year.
What was your favorite?
Lessons in Chemistry. It was fantastic. I had a really unconventional scientist/mom as the main character.
Okay.
I also really like traveling with my kids and sort of seeing these new places through their eyes as well. And I love surfing. I don't get to do it as much as I would like because we moved a little farther from the ocean. I used to be able to go before work because it was a 20-minute drive from my house.
Speaking of your kids, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a doctor.
A physician? Because you are a doctor.
I am a doctor. So, technically I did sort of achieve that goal. So I wanted to be either a physician or a teacher. And I sort of went back and forth between these two things.
How did you end up in chemistry versus pursuing an MD?
Chemistry is a really great background for studying medicine. The more I learned about organic chemistry, the more I sort of firmly believe that organic chemistry is a wonderful sort of way to train doctors, because what you're looking for is patterns in things that result in certain outcomes, and that's true in organic chemistry. It's true when you're a physician.
Well, what's the best professional advice you've received thus far?
Who you work for is far more important than exactly what you're doing. So even if you're not working on the most important problem or question, if you're doing it with good people, it makes it a way better experience and a lot more sort of fun and life-giving. From the person who taught me how to code, who was this guy, Bill, he would always tell me two things. So one is if I was struggling with some code, he would say, well, 4 eyes is better than 2. So let's both look at this together. And if I was really stuck, he would say, just go outside and take a walk. And almost every single time, by the time I got back from my walk, I would have worked through whatever problem it was, even if I wasn't consciously thinking about it. The best negotiation advice I ever got was from my friend and mentor, Julia. And, we were practicing some negotiating. And her advice was to say, I want to feel good about this job when I start. And part of that is feeling like I'm being paid what I'm worth. So I would like this much money. And that took a lot of the discomfort out of asking for more from me, because I could kind of go in and say, I'm really excited about this, but this is what I need to feel like I'm valued when I'm starting in this position. So those are the best advice I've gotten.
This year's Women's History Month theme is celebrating women who tell our stories. What excites you about this theme?
Women sharing our stories helps all of us feel more like part of a human community and less alone. That feeling of belonging that reading somebody else's story, or there's this poet, Kate Bear, who writes this like beautiful and kind of devastating poetry about motherhood. And when I read her poetry, I feel so seen because it speaks to the hard parts of being a parent.
Is there a woman who has inspired you most thus far in your life?
My grandmother, who we called Ann Mom, she was born in 1911. She grew up during the Depression. She really wanted to become a nurse. And her father said, no, that is not an acceptable thing for you to do. You're going to secretarial school. And she worked as a secretary during the day, and she went to school at night for her nursing degree. So she got her nursing degree, went and worked as a nurse, and later three of her sisters, because she was one of 9 children. So three of her sisters went on and became nurses, because after her father saw her doing it, he was kind of like, oh, this is actually not so bad. This is a really good way for her to make her living. I find it really inspiring that she was sort of like, kind of bucking the trend. Like, she was a real trailblazer for her sisters and for other women of that generation.
She sounds like a really neat lady. Thanks for sharing that. Is there a female storyteller who has inspired you?
One of them is Louise Penny. She is a Canadian murder mystery author, and all of her murder mysteries are set in Quebec. 2 more are Madeleine L'Engle. Again, she wrote, she's best known for A Wrinkle in Time, and she created this other world. And also Judy Blume. And something they have in common is that their characters are girls. They're not perfect, but they're sort of just right for what they're trying to do. And it sort of like brings these girls like emotional lives to the forefront, and it sort of like shows you how important that inner life is for people. In terms of nonfiction, there are 2 that are very different. So there's Mary Roach, and what I love about her is that she makes a lot of scientific topics very accessible. So I think she had one called Stiff, one called Guts. You can sort of imagine what these books are about. So a lot of times they're about kind of gross things, but I find them fascinating. And the other is Laura Vanderkam. So she's kind of she's an author and sort of time use researcher. And why she's inspiring is because like reading her books it changed how I view time.
Neat.
So she kind of showed me like, it's like you can do these little steps and then it adds up to these bigger goals over time.
How long have you been at BigCommerce?
I have been at BigCommerce somewhere between 8 and 8.5 years.
Do you remember what was the thing that made you accept the offer?
I was pulled over by somebody who took a PMO role at BigCommerce, and he kept pinging me and he kept saying, he's like, I think you'll like it here. It's better than the other company, because he'd been there. I took up my interviews, interrogating my interviewers about different things. And we did not have time to do whiteboard coding. So I ended up getting a take home, and I messed up the take home. I forgot an edge case. I actually wrote up the corrected solution because, it was one of those things where you submit the thing online, but you can do it in your own IDE. So I submitted a corrected solution. I basically was kind of like, well, if they don't take it, if they think that I'm bad because I messed this up the first time, that's fine. But if I don't do this, I'll never know. So I just sent off the corrected version to the recruiter. And fortunately, the hiring manager decided that was a sign of conscientiousness and hired me.
I agree with the hiring manager. The fact that you kept thinking about it and came up with a better solution is terrific. What does a typical day look like for you?
I sign on. I see if any disasters happened overnight. Usually the answer is no. I feel like I do my best work sort of either early in the morning or in the early afternoon, right after lunch. So if I have something significant, I'll usually try to do it then, unless things have come up.
Is there anything that you really look forward to or excites you about each day?
I like talking through problems with the people on my team. And I also meet a lot with my counterparts on adjacent teams. So other lead or team lead engineers.
What's been your biggest win or success or highlight?
So I was the first female lead engineer at BigCommerce.
Nice. Congratulations.
I used to be on the omni-channel team, and I did our initial Facebook integration. There was a contractual deadline, and I had to scope the project, despite the fact that it was being done in Scala, and I did not know Scala at the time. And it took me 3 months to learn enough Scala to do the work and to do the work. I don't attribute that entirely to my brilliance. Scala has a lot less boilerplate code that you need to write to transform things, but I was pretty proud of that. In terms of extracurricular things, I'm really proud that I've been able to bring the Tech Women program into BigCommerce. Tech Women is a State Department sponsored exchange program that brings professional women in STEM over from countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia for a few-week crash course in Silicon Valley. They have a mentorship at a company, so they get to meet people. They usually work on a project and learn a lot that they hopefully can take back with them to their home countries and make a difference for other folks there.
Is there a most important quality that you think somebody should have if they want to move into the software industry?
Persistent, curious, and flexible. Curiosity can be what drives you, especially if you're trying to work through really hard bugs. Kind of like, okay, you can't just throw your hands up and say, well, I'm not going to do anything about this. You need to figure it out. You need to dig in there and search for the why and the how. I think it's good if somebody can, celebrate the small successes, because there is always going to be more work.
Is there any advice that you would give to an aspiring software engineer, whether it's go learn these things or be aware of that, or any advice?
The most important skill is probably problem solving. And that's in the case of digging for a bug. That's in the case of working with your product manager when you're trying to figure out okay, they're saying, all right, we have this business problem. So then you need to come at it from the engineering angle of how can we build this? How, and not just one way, but come up with several different ways so that you can evaluate them and say okay, if we do this, the following downsides can happen. If we do this, these are the downsides, these are the upsides. Oh, this one is probably not going to be very performant. The other thing is being kind to yourself. And that's something that I struggle with. I am a recovering perfectionist, I would probably say. You're a person and you're writing code and you are going to release something that is going to break something for someone somewhere. So what's important? Is it important that we're perfect? No, it's important that we try not to do the same thing over and over again. It's important that we are able to respond quickly once we realize there is a problem.
Rarely is there a perfect solution. You're almost always making trade-offs. And so it does come down to understanding what's most important and solving for that, and recognizing that perfection doesn't exist in software. Thanks again, Meg, for spending time with me today. Really appreciate your insights and advice. And to everybody else, take care.
Thanks, Judith.